Leon was 38 years old, made $61,000 a year as a lead transit electrician for the city of Baltimore. And on a Tuesday at 4:17 p.m., his world was delivered to him in a 9x12 manila envelope. The rain outside was relentless, a cold November downpour that slicked the streets of his Edmondson neighborhood and blurred the view from his front window. He stood in the living room of the row house his grandfather had bought for $3,000 in 1958, the same house his father had been born in, the same house Leon had meticulously rewired from the knob and tube up to modern code with his own two hands. The house smelled of old wood, lemon polish, and the damp wool of his work coat hanging by the door. A man in a cheap rain-spotted suit, costing maybe $150, had handed him the envelope with a practiced indifference that made Leon's skin crawl. He hadn't needed to open it to know what it was. The sterile weight of it, the formal address block, Leon Adebayo versus Simone Adebayo, was a death certificate for his 8-year marriage. He placed the envelope on the worn oak dining table next to a bowl of plastic fruit that had been his grandmother's. For a long moment, he just stared at it, his large, capable hands resting flat on the table's surface. These were the hands that could coax life back into a dead transformer in the belly of a subway tunnel, that could trace a single faulty wire through a mile of bundled chaos. But they were trembling now. A fine, almost invisible tremor that started in his fingertips and worked its way up to his heart. His salary wasn't glamorous, not like Simone's 6-figure income as a pharmaceutical sales director, but it was honest. It was built on overtime shifts in freezing rain and sweltering summer nights, on call-outs that tore him from his bed at 3 in the morning. It was the money that had paid for the groceries, the utilities, the property taxes on this house that was his, and his alone, a fact he thought she understood. He had no idea how wrong he was. He'd always known Simone saw his work as quaint, a blue-collar novelty. He was her rugged, handy husband, a charming accessory to her polished, ambitious life. She loved to tell the story at her corporate dinner parties about how he'd fixed the faulty wiring at a 5-star restaurant where they were dining, saving the evening. Her friends would laugh, impressed, while she would pat his arm. "He fixes wires, not wealth," she'd say, with a tinkling laugh that always sounded a little too sharp. "I build the empire. He keeps the lights on." Leon would smile, a tight, practiced smile, feeling less like a husband and more like a well-maintained appliance. He had swallowed the casual condescension for years, believing it was the price of admission for loving a woman so far outside his world. He believed her ambition would lift them both. Now, holding the divorce petition, he saw it wasn't an empire she was building for them. It was an escape route for her. Have you ever felt the ground beneath your feet turn to quicksand? That feeling when a truth you built your life on is revealed as a lie? Let us know in the comments if you've ever faced a betrayal that changed everything. The facade of their life had been built with his sweat and her expensive taste. Leon remembered the day, 2 years ago. She came home with a Louis Vuitton Speedy bag, a $1,850 purchase she announced as a little treat for landing a new account. She'd placed it on the kitchen counter, its pristine brown leather, a stark contrast to his own worn Carhartt lunchbox, a $30 piece of gear that had lasted him a decade. That same week, he'd spent $90 on a new pair of steel-toed Red Wing boots, because the sole on his old ones had finally worn through after 7 years of service. He'd debated the purchase for a month, trying to find them on sale. "You deserve nice things too, Leon," she'd said, not looking up from her $1,200 iPhone 12 Pro as she admired her handbag. But her tone implied a clear distinction. Her nice things were investments in her image. His were just tools for a job. Their home was a museum of this contrast. The row house itself was modest, a 2-story brick structure with a small, neat yard. He maintained himself with a 20-year-old Craftsman mower. Inside, however, Simone had waged a quiet war against its humble origins. She'd insisted on a kitchen renovation that cost $32,000, complete with Italian marble countertops that ran $400 a square foot, and a wolf range that cost more than his 2012 Toyota Camry. Leon had done all the demolition and electrical work himself, saving them nearly $10,000 in labor, a contribution she conveniently forgot when telling her friends about her new kitchen. It was an absolute gut job, you can't imagine, she'd sigh, gesturing at the gleaming stainless steel. But you have to spend money to create value. He never corrected her. He never mentioned the 16-hour days he'd spent pulling new circuits while also working his full-time job. He remembered a Saturday afternoon in late August, the air thick and heavy. He was on a ladder in the living room, carefully patching a section of plaster ceiling that had cracked with age. It was delicate work, requiring a patient hand and an eye for detail. Sweat dripped from his brow, his deep brown skin luminous in the shafts of dusty sunlight cutting through the old window panes. Simone walked in, dressed in a $400 white linen sundress, the scent of her $250 Chanel perfume cutting through the smell of plaster dust. She didn't look at him on the ladder. She was looking at the wall, her expression one of deep dissatisfaction. "I was just on Zillow," she announced, her voice echoing slightly in the high-ceilinged room. "There's a condo for sale in Harbor East, 2 bedrooms, floor-to-ceiling windows, a view of the water, $910,000. Leon paused, his trowel hovering over the wet plaster. "That's a lot of money, Simone." She finally turned her gaze to him, a slight wrinkle in her perfect brow. "It's an investment, Leon. This place," she waved a dismissive hand encompassing the home his family had owned for over 60 years, "is a starter home. We're not starters anymore. I'm not anyway." The implication hung in the air between them, thick as the plaster dust on the floor. He was the starter. She had moved on to the main course. He came down from the ladder, wiping his hands on a rag. "This is my family's home, Simone. It's paid off. We have no mortgage. That's a kind of wealth, you know." She had laughed, a short, brittle sound. "Oh, Leon, that's not wealth. That's sentiment. Wealth is an asset that appreciates at 12% a year, not a pile of bricks in a neighborhood where the houses sell for $200,000 on a good day." She walked over and picked a piece of dried plaster off his coiled, natural hair, her touch light and condescending. "Don't worry, I have a plan. We just need to build our capital." He had no idea her plan for building capital involved liquidating his labor, dollar by dollar, into an account he didn't even know existed. He just thought they had different ideas about the future. He didn't realize they were living in 2 completely different marriages. The cruelty had escalated so slowly, he hadn't recognized it as a coordinated campaign. It was a series of paper cuts, small humiliations that bled him of his confidence over years. The primary architect of this was not just Simone, but her mother, Denise. Denise was a woman who appraised everything by its price tag. She saw Leon not as a son-in-law, but as a debit on her daughter's social ledger. A family dinner a year prior stood out in his memory with painful clarity. They were at the Capitol Grill, a place Simone loved, where a steak cost $80 and the wine list started at $100 a bottle. Leon felt out of place in his best $40 dress shirt from Kohl's, acutely aware of the $8,700 Armani suit on the man at the next table. Denise, draped in a St. John knit suit that cost at least $2,000, had been holding court, talking about Simone's latest sales award. "She gets her drive from me," Denise said, taking a delicate sip of her Chardonnay. "We know how to create value. We're not afraid of the work it takes to build a real life." She then turned her gaze to Leon, a saccharine smile on her face. It's a good thing my daughter is so successful, isn't it, Leon? Keeping you two afloat on that little city salary? It must be nice not having to worry about money." The table went quiet. Leon could feel the heat rise in his cheeks. He looked at Simone, expecting her to defend him, to say anything. But she just smiled, a tight, placid expression on her beautiful face. She reached over and patted his hand. "Leon is very supportive," she said, as if he were a charitable cause she sponsored. He felt 3 inches tall. He ate his $80 steak, and it tasted like ash. The physical manifestation of his stolen labor came just a few months before the divorce papers. A massive thunderstorm had rolled through Baltimore, knocking out power to a huge section of the light rail system during the evening commute. It was a Category 1 emergency. Leon was called in at 5 p.m. and didn't get home until 4 a.m. the next morning. He spent 11 hours in the pouring, freezing rain, 30 feet up in a bucket truck, wrestling with thick, high-voltage cables that hissed and spat in the wet air. His hands were numb, his body soaked through, but when the lights finally flickered back on and the first train rolled through the station, a surge of pride cut through his exhaustion. He had done that. He had restored a piece of the city's pulse. He arrived home leaving his mud-caked, $45 work boots on the porch as he always did. The house was dark and silent. He crept into their bedroom, hoping not to wake Simone. As he peeled off his wet clothes, she stirred. She didn't ask if he was okay. She didn't ask what had happened. She sat up, sniffed the air, and said, "Leon, you smell like wet metal. And did you bring those filthy boots inside?" The mud stains the porch paint. He stood there, shivering and exhausted, a man who had just spent half a day battling a storm for the city, being reprimanded for the smell of his labor. "I left them outside," he said, his voice flat. "Sorry." She sighed, a dramatic put-upon sound, and rolled back over, pulling the $500 duvet over her head. The overtime pay for that brutal 11-hour shift, a total of $942, was one of the last deposits he would later discover was routed directly into her mother's bank account. The final piece of the puzzle, the one he hadn't understood at the time, clicked into place just weeks before the end. He was in the kitchen making coffee at 6:15 a.m. when he heard Simone's low voice from the living room. She was on the phone, likely with her mother. He couldn't hear the whole conversation, just snippets that floated through the quiet house. "But no, he has no idea. He's not a numbers guy, Mom. He just signs the deposit slips I put in front of him. He thinks it's all going into the joint savings. Yes, for the down payment. Of course he trusts me." Leon froze, the coffee scoop halfway to the machine. A cold dread, sharp and acidic, washed over him. Deposit slips? He deposited his checks via a mobile app. The only slips he signed were for his overtime, which Simone had insisted on handling, claiming she could get a better interest rate by depositing them through a special account linked to her portfolio. "It's how we build our capital, baby," she'd said. He had trusted her. He had believed they were a team. He shook his head, pushing the sinister thought away. He was tired. He was mishearing things. It was a misunderstanding. He poured his coffee, the bitter taste a premonition of the truth that was coming for him. Now, in the rain-soaked quiet of his living room, the manila envelope lay on the table like a bomb. He finally slid it open with a kitchen knife, his movements slow and deliberate. The documents inside were cold to the touch: summons, petition for dissolution of marriage, financial affidavits. He scanned the pages, his heart a heavy, rhythmic drum against his ribs. Simone's stated income was accurate. Her list of assets was long and detailed. Her 401k worth $250,000. her stock portfolio worth another $100,000, her white BMW 3 Series, valued at $43,000. Then he got to the section listing his assets. It listed his city pension, valued at $78,000, and then, under real estate, it listed the row house. Marital property, it said, with an estimated value of $220,000 to be sold and proceeds divided. A cold fury, unlike anything he had ever felt, began to build in his chest. Marital property? This house had been in his family for 3 generations. It was his birthright, the one true thing he owned, free and clear. He flipped the page, and that's when he saw it. Page 7. A section titled Waiver of Interest in Non-Marital Trusts. It was a dense block of legalese, but a few phrases jumped out. Hereby waives any and all current or future claim. Irrevocable trust, established by Marcus Adebayo. Beneficiary, Leon Adebayo. And there, at the bottom of the paragraph, on the line designated for his signature, were 2 neatly penned initials, L.A. He stared at them. He had never seen this document before in his life. He had never signed it. She had forged his initials. She had tried to get him to sign away his inheritance without him even knowing it existed. The rain beat against the window pane, each drop a hammer blow against the fragile structure of his life. He sank into a chair, the papers rattling in his hand, the overheard phone call, the deposit slips, the condescension, the dinner with her mother. It wasn't a series of random slights, it was a plan, a long, carefully executed strategy to strip him of his dignity, his labor, and finally, his legacy. She hadn't just fallen out of love with him. She had been actively plotting his financial ruin while sleeping next to him every night. She thought he was simple. A man who fixed wires, who wouldn't read the fine print. She thought he was stupid enough to sign his own dispossession. That was her first mistake. But forging his initials on a document referencing a trust she clearly didn't understand, that was her last. Because Leon knew exactly what the Marcus Adebayo Irrevocable Trust was. His father, a man who fixed buses for the same transit authority Leon worked for, had been quiet, but he hadn't been a fool. And he had made sure his son would never be a fool either. The days that followed were a masterclass in restraint. Leon moved through his life with a calm that felt alien in his own body. On the outside, he was the same man. He went to work, he came home, he ate the dinners Simone prepared, food that now tasted like poison. But on the inside, a cold, methodical engine had started to turn. He was no longer a husband. He was an investigator gathering evidence against an adversary. The first test came that very night. He was sitting at the oak dining table, the divorce papers hidden away in the toolbox in his Camry's trunk. Simone came home at 7:30 p.m., carrying a takeout bag from a Thai restaurant that cost $60. She was humming, a cheerful, carefree sound that grated on his raw nerves. She set the table, chattering about a difficult client and a new marketing campaign. She seemed lighter, happier than she had in months. It was the buoyancy of a person who believes they have successfully jettisoned dead weight. "How was your day, honey?" she asked, her voice bright. Leon looked up from his plate of Pad See Ew. He met her eyes, his own expression carefully neutral. It was fine. Fixed a signal switch at the Camden Yards station. Long day. He kept his voice even, his breathing steady. His heart was hammering. A frantic bird trapped in his chest, but his hands were rock solid as he picked up his fork. "Pass the salt?" he asked. She did, her fingers brushing his, and he felt nothing. No spark, no anger, just a profound and chilling emptiness. She had no idea she was dining with a ghost. The next day, he put the second part of his quiet investigation into motion. While she was at work, He went into the small home office they shared. He had always hated the room. She had decorated it in a cold, minimalist style. A $10,000 Eames chair, a glass desk, white walls, with a single abstract painting that looked like a black smear. It was her space. He rarely entered it. He went to the filing cabinet, a sleek, $300 metal unit. He opened the drawer labeled Financials. Inside were dozens of neatly organized files. He found the one labeled Joint Savings. Inside were bank statements, and tucked in the back, just as he'd hoped, was a folder of deposit slips. His overtime deposits. He pulled them out. Each one was a carbon copy slip from a bank he didn't use, Denise's bank. And each one was made out not to a joint account, but to an account number he didn't recognize. He took out his phone and photographed every single one. 53 slips in total, dating back 4.5 years. The dates, the amounts, the foreign account number, it was all there. A meticulous record of her theft. That evening, he staged his final test. He sat on the sofa, pretending to watch TV, the copied slips on the coffee table, as if he'd just stumbled across them. When Simone came in, he picked them up. "Hey, honey," he said, his tone one of mild, domestic confusion. "I was looking for these for my records, the OT deposits. I couldn't find them in our online banking app. Which account did you say these were going into again? The joint savings?" He watched her face. For a split second, a flicker of something, panic, maybe, crossed her features, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by a dazzling smile. She walked over, sat beside him, and took the slips from his hand. "Of course, baby. The high-yield joint savings. It doesn't show up on the main app, remember? It's a special portfolio account. It's how we're building our future." She leaned in and kissed his cheek. Her skin was cold. The lie was so smooth, so practiced, it was almost impressive. He nodded slowly, pretending to accept the explanation. "Right. The portfolio account. Got it." He turned back to the TV, his face a mask of normalcy. Inside, the cold engine was humming,